All right, so it's about 3 minutes past the hour, so I'll say let's get started. Welcome, everybody. I'm really grateful for you guys joining us today. The topic of today's workshop is going to be writing a research proposal. So it is particularly useful for seniors who are, about to have a deadline for their senior thesis research proposals, but there's a lot of content in there that is useful and applicable for everybody. So if you're not a senior, I do encourage you to stick around, just because, as well as being useful preparation for your thesis in the future, you might actually find a lot of this advice being useful sooner rather than later. And as I mentioned, this will be recorded and put on our YouTube page. The recording will be put on our YouTube page in a couple of hours. So if you have to leave early or you're having internet issues, you can catch up on the parts that you missed. So I have a slideshow that I will be using to guide the presentation. So just give me 1 minute to start screen sharing. Okay. All right. So how to write a research proposal. So I'm going to start with the general structure of the proposal, and then we're going to dive into the specifics of what is expected of each section and how you can get an idea of what to write if you are stuck. So sorry, can people please mute when they come in? Thank you. It might come as no surprise to know that the general structure of your proposal pretty much mirrors the general structure of an essay. So as with an essay, you'll have an introduction in which you introduce what you're researching and why it is important, right? Why you should care and why your reader should care. Excuse me. You'll discuss your methodology, right? Are you doing surveys? Are you doing interviews? Is it qualitative or quantitative research, etc.? How are you going to gather your results, basically? You're going to have a literature review in which you discuss what other scholars have already said about this topic and how you can add to that body of knowledge, that conversation. And, you will also probably have to submit a preliminary source list in which you tell the people evaluating your proposal what kinds of sources you plan to use, right? What texts, articles, books, etc. might be key to you as you proceed. All right. So before you even start writing this, proposal and having this nice structure, we need to decide on a research question in order to guide your proposal. So what is a research question? A research question is the question that you'll be answering in your research, right? So, the thesis statement of your essay, whether it's, an essay for your second year seminar or your senior thesis, is going to be an answer to this question. It is not the same as a topic, which is simply the general area you'll be studying. So I want to drill down on this and spend some time on it, because oftentimes I've noticed that when I'm speaking to students about what they're writing, they'll say, I'm writing about women's rights in Afghanistan, or I'm writing about Islam in Kyrgyzstan, whatever topic. That's a topic, right? That's not a question. So, there are many different questions that you can ask related to that topic, and it's important to have a strong research question in order to guide not only the piece of writing, but the proposal beforehand, right? So let's look at an example. So a topic might be something like, sorry, it's not going. Air pollution in Bishkek, right? Very broad topic. Perfectly good topic to write about, but again, there are a lot of questions that you can ask about that. A research question that we might ask about that topic could be, how do Bishkek's strategies for air pollution management compare to those of other Central Asian capitals, right? So this is, comparing the policies of different countries, right? Or How does Bishkek's air pollution affect residents' decisions about where to live? So kind of an economic decision. What impact does it have in terms of that? Or it could be urban development, I guess. How have environmental issues been discussed in Bishkek's most recent mayoral campaigns, right? So these are all three quite different questions, and they're all tied to one topic. So it's really important to go just beyond the topic and find a good research question. And we're going to talk in depth and momentarily about what a good research question is. But if you're thinking, I have a general idea of a topic I'm interested in, but I don't really have a question in mind. Well, doing some preliminary research, just some general reading on that topic might be a good way of brainstorming what a question might be, because it will allow you to see how other people have tried to investigate that topic. And maybe you'll also find an aspect of it that hasn't been studied yet. So if you have a topic in mind, but you don't have a research question in particular, I would encourage you to just do some preliminary research in order to get your brain going. All right, so moving on. What makes a good research question? We've just established that a research question is really important. What is a good research question in the first place? So a good research question should satisfy the following criteria. And again, I'm going to go into them in greater depth in one moment. So it should be specific. It should be complex. It should be neutral. It should be answerable with sources, credible sources, and it should be feasible, possible to answer given your resources, right? The time and the available materials that you have. All right, so let's go into further detail about these. What do we mean when we say it should be specific? A specific research question should clearly define the boundaries of what you'll be studying, right? It shouldn't leave the reader thinking, well, what do they mean by that? And the paper's discipline and scope, right, should be generally clear. Right, with the topic, remember that we were looking at of pollution in Bishkek, well, you can approach that from so many different angles, as we looked at with those, fake research questions that we came up with. You can have a politics paper about that, an economics paper about that, a health paper, an environmental paper, right? So the actual research question should be specific enough that we're not wondering, well, what angle is this person actually taking? All right, so let's look at an example. All right, so here's an example of a research question that I think we can improve. So the question is, how does pollution affect people? All right, so I'm going to ask people to press the raise hands icon and give a comment. How can we improve this, or what's the issue with this? If anybody has any thoughts.
Maybe we can clarify in which way it affects, for example, health or economic situation. Like
Very
put
good.
a boundary. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Were you want to say something else?
Yeah, just put a boundary. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. This word affect, that can mean a lot of different things. As you said, it can be, how does it affect their income, their money? How does it affect their health? It can mean a lot of different things. Very good. So this word affect is vague. And unless we add some clarification, we don't really know what that means. Any other comments here?
We've had a couple of people. I think Medina had her hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to add, this topic sounds a little bit broad. We don't exactly understand where and who, what kind of people, like living in which area maybe. So
yeah, absolutely. So those are two further types of specifications that we can add, right? People, who does that mean? Are we talking about old people, young people, people in a certain place, people who work in a specific job that might be more exposed to pollution than other people? This is really broad. So there are a lot of kind of broad categories here that we can improve on. So as our participants just noted, affect in what way? Physically, psychologically, spiritually, what kind of people, what kind of pollution, air, water, food, food contamination, where, this is a very broad question. We can really do a lot to specify it. So very good. Let's do another example. So how can we fight air pollution? So how can we make this one more specific, or how can we improve this one? Does anybody have any thoughts? Anybody want to share?
Maybe like in which ways to fight air pollution?
So
how we can decrease.
Yeah, so
pollutants.
decrease might be a more specific word than fight. Okay. So you mentioned like in what ways? So, well, does anybody else have any thoughts here?
Yeah, I think Medina does.
Maybe again, yeah, this is too broad. Just to specify, yes, air pollution, where exactly, what kind of people maybe will be fighting this pollution, and what kind of steps can be like taken in order to tackle this problem.
Yeah, I think you raised a good point here, which is, well, you mentioned the location as well, which is good. Air pollution in different places has different causes, right? So that would be one area that we could specify as well, the location we're talking about. But also you mentioned the people. Who is we, right? Are we making an assumption about who the reader is, right? The way that politicians can fight air pollution is very different from the way that, activists can fight air pollution. It's very different from the way that lawyers can fight air pollution, right? A politician might try to decrease air pollution by passing new laws, or lawyers might do it by trying to launch a legal campaign. Activists might do it through protests or, public awareness campaigns or direct action. So defining who we're talking about is going to give a lot greater specificity, because, those different categories of people are going to use very different tools to solve the same general problem. So thank you guys for all of those astute observations. So here are some, improved variations or versions of the vague and unspecific questions that we were just looking at. So we might say something like, how does Bishkek's air pollution affect residents' mental health? So here we have a specific place, Bishkek, a specific type of pollution, air pollution, again, very different from water pollution, etc. Who, the residents of that city, and, affect in what way? Affect their mental health. So this is much more specific than this very broad question that we were discussing earlier. And again, looking at the second example, what strategies are activists in Central Asia using to fight for greater environmental protections? So we have specific people, right? Political activists, and then a specific place as well, Central Asia. We could be more specific there. Say, Kyrgyzstan. But I hope you guys can see that these questions are much more specific than these original vague versions. And I also hope that you can see that with a specific question, it's going to be much easier to answer, right? This question, how does pollution affect people? It's so broad, it's so vague that it would be, actually a really difficult task for you to try to answer that in a satisfactory way in an essay, which probably has, a word limit or a page limit, right? So giving yourself a specific question is actually going to make your job a lot easier, because it's going to limit how much, you actually have to write about, but it's also going to limit how much you have to research, and maybe also point you in the direction of what kinds of keywords you can use to do your research, etc. So this is going to make your job a lot easier, and also your writing a lot stronger. All right. the next criterion we're going to talk about is complexity. So a complex research question cannot be answered by a simple yes or no. If you could just answer the essay with the yes or no, then that would be all you need. You would be turning in one word to your teacher, and you wouldn't have to be spending pages and pages writing your essay. Furthermore, the answer is not easily found on Google, right? You can't just answer it with a number or an easily found fact, right? Instead, it requires synthesis and interpretation. So instead of, just asking for one fact, you're going to have to, do some research, consult different sources, maybe combine different types of information, different interviews, different sets of data in order to find some kind of conclusion and, reach an answer, right? So not a yes or no, not an easily, found answer like, what is the capital of Kyrgyzstan or something like that. All right, so let's look at some more examples here. So does Bishkek have an air pollution problem? What do you guys think about that? Any observations to make here?
I think it just requires a yes and no.
Yeah, it's a yes or no question. And then, sorry, Medina, did you also have something you'd like to add?
I also wanted to say it's kind of straightforward question, so it's too easy to answer either yes or no.
Yeah, it's a yes or no question, and it's very easy to answer. First of all, I think anyone who has lived in Bishkek, especially in the winter, could give an answer without having to Google it. But also, let's say you had never been to Kyrgyzstan. Well, you could Google, air pollution data, and you could find the answer to that really easily. So, obviously, yes, the answer is yes. So it's not worth writing an essay about that question. What about this? Is pollution bad?
It's also yes or no question. Yes, it is bad.
Yeah, so this is also a yes or no question, and it's a very kind of simplistic one. It almost seems like kind of how a child would ask a question, right? Is something bad or is it good? Well, that's not a really academic way of talking about things. A more nuanced academic and analytical way of talking about them would be, looking at the effects, whether that's something like health effects or economic effects, as we were just talking about. So this, is bad kind of for a combination of reasons, both because it's not specific, right? Bad in what way? And also because it lacks complexity. Very good. All right. And then the last one, I think you guys kind of get the idea here. So I can't see. What was Bishkek's average PM 2.5? So that's like molecules in the air. It's like basically pollution concentration last winter. So, this has some maybe a complex term in it, right? This technical term. But ultimately, it's an easily researched question. And all that the answer is going to be is a number, right? That's not, you're not going to write a whole essay about, one number that you can easily Google. All right. So let's look at some, revised and improved versions of those questions. So rather than just asking, does Bishkek have an air pollution problem? We can ask what the causes are, right? What is the principal cause of Bishkek's winter smog, right? So that is going to actually necessitate us, going beyond just a yes or no, and actually, looking at some climate data and deciding, what is the main cause? Is it cars? Is it, coal from home heating? What is it exactly? So, this asks for a higher degree of research and argumentation. So an improved version of is pollution bad might be something like, how does Bishkek's air pollution impact young people's attitudes about their city, right? So instead of just saying, oh, it's bad, we're going to look at what kind of effects, maybe negative, that pollution has on, people's ideas about where they live, right? So, maybe they'll do a survey or some interviews or something for an anthropology or sociology project. And then rather than the last one, we might have something like, how did the lockdown impact Bishkek's air quality last winter? So instead of just looking at a number, you might be looking at, the concentration of different types of molecules in the air. You might be trying to hazard a guess about, why the lockdown caused a decrease in this or an increase in that. Again, there's more synthesis, putting different things together, and more interpretation, trying to explain, what the reasons might be. All right. So the next one, neutral. A neutral research question does not contain assumptions that might influence the results of the study one way or another, right? The reason that you're doing the study is because you don't know the answer. If you knew the answer, then you wouldn't have to do the study. And so, if you are genuinely interested in finding the answer, you should, try as hard as you can to create a neutral research question. And furthermore, things like a neutral survey, neutral questions in an interview, in order to get, free and hopefully accurate and unbiased responses. It does not contain judgmental or moralizing language. So what do I mean by that? Let's look at an example. All right. So why are politicians too lazy to find a solution to Bishkek's air pollution problem? So what does anybody have any thoughts on this or some observations? I should say, I see that some people have put things in the chat, but I can't see it with this screen maximized. So if you would like to participate, please instead press the hand raise button, because I can't actually see. All right, Medina.
Well, the words too lazy do not really sound like academic and a little bit judgmental, which I think it's a little bit inappropriate in the research work.
Absolutely. Yeah, this doesn't sound like something you would see in an academic paper, right? It sounds like, maybe someone at home or, in a conversation with friends who's complaining about politicians in the city, right? But it's not how, academics talk. And it's also, it contains an assumption, right? Which is that the problem is that politicians are too lazy, right? That is the cause, or at least one of the causes of Bishkek's air pollution problem. Maybe it's true. I'm not saying either way, but this question is assuming that that's true, and it hasn't proven that. So let's look at another. Ainura, do you have something you'd like to say?
Yes, I think it's also, as you just mentioned, we can't measure, like, we can't find out if they are lazy or not. It's impossible to, because it's too general, I think.
Yeah, very good. How would you measure that? That's a great question. How would you quantify that? It's easy to put a measurement to things like, the amount of pollution in the air, something like that. How would you measure the laziness of politicians? I'm not saying whether or not they are lazy, but it's impossible really to quantify. Very good. All right, so let's look at another one that we can improve. Why are people too ignorant to realize that using coal is bad? All right, so what do we think about this one? Asghatay?
Yeah, I think it's also has some assumptions and sounds judgmental, like why people are too ignorant. So it's basically calling people ignorant.
Exactly. That is not, the job of a researcher. The job of a researcher is not to insult the people that they study. Sorry, did you have something else you'd like to say?
No, that's it. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Very good. And then again, we have this, words like bad, they're judgmental and moralizing. They're also not super sophisticated. So another thing that I would say is that really the problem, right? So again, this is assuming that the reason people use coal is because they're ignorant and they don't know any better, right? A question that I might ask to that is, is it really the case that they don't know that coal is bad? I mean, anyone who's, been by a coal fire and has breathed that in probably knows that burning coal is not great. It's quite likely, indeed, I think it's probably the case that rather than being too ignorant and not realizing that coal is bad, maybe people just don't have another option, right? So this has a big assumption and quite a judgmental assumption about people that is probably, I would say, not true. All right, so let's look at some better versions. So a better version of this question might be something like, how does Bishkek's air pollution affect residents' voting patterns in city elections? So this is looking at, again, maybe a political science student seeing, let's say, whether people report that, environmental policy was something that they considered when they chose the candidate for mayor, something like that, when they voted. Or for the second one, we might have something like, what factors contribute to Nova Storica residents' continued reliance on coal? So instead of assuming that, these people who might burn coal in their house are just ignorant, it's actually asking in an open, neutral manner, why are they actually doing it? What makes them do that? So it's not assuming beforehand. All right, next one. Answerable with sources. All right, so a research question that is answerable with sources, I should say credible sources, is not an eternal philosophical question. It is not something like, what is the meaning of life? Why do good people do bad things? Or why do bad things happen to good people, right? These are great questions that we should think about, but you cannot answer them with the types of sources that you need to use for a research question, right? Instead, you need to propose a question that can actually be answered using things like literary analysis, archival research, surveys, controlled experimentation, or other methods. All right, and this is a problem that I often see with FYS students, with younger students, especially because the students might be trying to establish the stakes, the importance of their essay. And they think, okay, the way I can do that is by attaching my essay to some huge, really important question like, what is the meaning of life? In actual fact, rather than making your essay seem stronger and more important, it makes it seem weaker because it's impossible to answer that question in the few pages that you have for an FYS essay. So let's look at some examples here. I think these are pretty straightforward, so I don't think we need to talk about them. So something like, what is the fundamental nature of humanity? Or how on earth would you research this? We're just talking, how would you go about proving the laziness of politicians, right? How do you measure that? Again, how would you research this? What article or test could you use in order to support an argument on this? What does it mean to behave ethically? Again, that's a great question, but given the types of sources that you have to use in a research question, it's just not really possible to do. Again, I'm not saying that these aren't worthwhile questions to ponder, but these are, philosophy paper questions, not research questions. So, again, this is more for like an FYS student, because I do see this often. How do Marcus Aurelius and Augustine, two authors that FYS students have to read, differ in their beliefs about human nature. So here, instead of the student trying to make some grand claim about the fundamental nature of all humans, this essay is doing a much smaller and more manageable task, meaning the student is analyzing specific texts, the texts by Marcus Aurelius and Augustine that they have to read for their class, and trying to see what these authors have to say about that question and how they differ, right? One of them is they are trying to make a claim. The other one is they are observing and analyzing the claims of other people. And this is going to be a lot easier and more manageable, right? Within 4 pages or however long. All right, the second one. So instead of what does it mean to behave ethically, what does it mean to be good, right? What ideas about the ethical responsibilities of rulers can be found in the Baburname, which is, again, another book that the FYS students have to read. So again, rather than making some grand philosophical argument, we're doing something much smaller here, which is analyzing a text to see what the author's argument is and explaining what the author is trying to say about a particular, philosophical question. All right, so I hope that distinction is clear because I do see this issue coming up a lot, especially with younger students. All right, so I use this phrase credible source a couple of times. If you're wondering what is a credible source, and furthermore, how do I find good sources for my research? As I mentioned a little earlier, we just did a really in-depth talk about how to find good sources and what makes a good source. And the recording of that talk is on the Work AUCA YouTube channel. I really encourage you to check it out because I think it was really helpful. All right, the last criterion that we're going to talk about, a good research question should be feasible, possible to answer given your resources. Meaning, you can give a satisfying answer to it within the time and methods and using the methods currently available to you, right? You guys are students with deadlines, right? You don't have infinite time, you don't have infinite energy, you don't have infinite money. So there are going to be a lot of questions that might come to your head that are great research questions. They satisfy all the other criteria, but maybe they're just too big. Maybe they're not right for you right now. So as well as thinking about the other criteria, please keep in mind that, you're not superheroes with everything in the world at your disposal. You do have limits, and sometimes narrowing down your focus is going to be really helpful in terms of allowing you to, stay sane and actually finish a satisfying paper within the time limits. So let's look at this next question. And again, I think it's pretty self-explanatory, so I don't think we have to discuss it. But how does Bishkek's air pollution impact people's health over a 10-year period? Well, if your essay is due in 2 weeks, you do not have time to do a 10-year longitudinal study. Again, this is a perfectly good research question otherwise, right? It satisfies the other criteria that we were just discussing, but it's just not possible for you guys right now. So instead, you might do something like, how does Bishkek's air pollution impact residents' perception of their own health? So instead of having to monitor people's physical health over a 10-year period, a question like this, you can just give people a survey and ask them, how do they perceive their health and how is that related to air pollution, or, do interviews, whatever. But this does not require physical examinations of people and, medical scans or whatever over a 10-year period. It's much smaller and much easier to answer given the kinds of resources that you guys have. All right, so we have been talking for a long time about a research question. I hope that was all clear. Before we dive into the next section, actually, does anybody have any questions at this point or comments? All right, if not, there will be time for questions at the end, excuse me. So if anybody has a question that occurs to you later, we can talk about it at the very end. All right, so, oh, sorry, Maria.
It seems that we had a couple of hands up.
I apologize.
It's okay. Nargiza and Hirat.
No, everything was clear about the questions. I just put thumbs up. So great.
Okay.
Everything was
Alrighty.
clear.
Okay. My apologies. Okay. Let's proceed then.
All right, so let's say now you have your perfect research question. It answers all those, it fits all those criteria. So let's talk again a little bit more in depth about the actual structure of your proposal. So as I mentioned earlier, the first part naturally is going to be an introduction. So in the introduction, you are going to establish what is the focus of your research, right? Stating very clearly what your research question is. Why is it important? So establishing the stakes. Why should the readers care? Why should you go through all the effort of writing a whole essay about this, especially a thesis that will take months and months? And then, yeah, what are your research questions? I think that's straightforward. All right, so I also wanted to provide you guys with some key phrases to use, both to help you guys ensure that you're using appropriate academic language, and also because, if you're stuck during the writing process, some of these sentence patterns might help you figure out, what you want to say next. So sentence patterns that you might use in your introduction. The study will examine something. The goal or objective of this project is to something. This project seeks or aims to something. I hope to shed light on, meaning like to make clear or give more information about. And this is significant because, right, when you're explaining the importance. I should say that, these key phrases can be used in the research proposal. They can also be used in the thesis themselves. They're perfectly capable of being used in the actual thesis. All right, so next, methodology. So that would be something like, what is your research design? How will you collect your data? How will you analyze it? So are you doing quantitative, qualitative research? Are you doing a survey? What kind of survey? Are you doing interviews? What sort of statistical analyses, statistical tests will you be using? That kind of thing. What is the justification for your choices? So, why did you choose to do this type of statistical analysis instead of that type? Or why did you choose to do a quantitative approach instead of a qualitative approach, right? Why do you think that this is the best way? And then, excuse me, are there any shortcomings to your methodological approach or any flaws in your research design that you should acknowledge? So for example, maybe, you were doing a survey of AUCA students and, for whatever reason, the majority of the people who responded to your survey were seniors or were from Tajikistan or were women instead of men, right? These are sort of slants in your sample that might make generalizing to the entire population a bit more difficult. And rather than hiding that fact, you should acknowledge it because that's the professional thing to do. All right, so some key phrases here could be things like, the study will use or utilize, mean the same thing, whatever structure. The survey will ask participants about whatever topic. The goal of the interviews is to, again, you can switch out interviews and survey for, whatever word is more appropriate. It's just an example. To recruit participants, I will, do this. Let's go forward. Something method, insert method will be used in order to, and then, that's the goal. And then, acknowledging the flaws, something might be over or underrepresented in the sample. All right. Oh, and then lastly, one limitation of this method is, right, might have some limitation. Just frozen. All right, so the literature review. I should also say that we did a lecture on how to write a full literature review last year. The recording, if I can give another little advertisement, is available on our Work AUCA YouTube page, and we will be re-delivering this talk, probably a little bit modified and improved very soon. So you can look out for that if you're curious or confused. All right, so a literature review should answer these questions. What is already known about this research question? Maybe it's already been researched, maybe it hasn't, and it's totally wide open, probably somewhere in between. What theoretical lenses have already been applied or are relevant to this question? What data have other studies found that might be relevant? And is there a hole in the scholarship that you can help fill? So the key takeaway about a literature review, lastly, do you find fault with the works of previous authors? The key point here is you're not just giving a summary of everything you've read. First of all, you should eliminate things that are not actually relevant, right? Sometimes you see a title of an article or a book and you think, oh, that's going to be perfect. And you start reading and you realize it's not relevant. Well, unfortunately, you did invest some time into something that's not useful. But just because you feel bad about doing that doesn't mean that you should try to make up for that by mentioning it anyway. So you should eliminate the things that are not relevant and only include the things that are most relevant. But you should also evaluate it, right? Maybe some sources are really useful and really helpful, really revolutionary, really changed your thinking. In that case, you should state that, right? This, I will draw heavily from this particular author or whatever. Or maybe you have read some things and you really disagree. Maybe you think that they interpreted the data wrong, or they have some assumptions, or their sample size was too small, whatever. You should also state that. So, right, you're being a little bit analytical, not just a little bit, you're being analytical here. You're not just summarizing. All right,
Sorry, what does it mean, like theoretical lenses? Have you already?
So, for example, if you are in a certain field like anthropology or sociology, maybe you have read certain theorists, certain key writers who have a particular approach to that field or subject, and you owe a lot to their thinking, right? So you might say, I will be applying the ideas of so-and-so to this case study, or I will be applying the methods pioneered by so-and-so to this case study, right? So a theoretical lens is basically a way of approaching a problem or question, a way of analyzing the world, a way of thinking about things within a certain discipline, basically. Maria, do you have anything to add there?
I just wanted to give an example.
Sure.
That might be helpful. So a few years ago, I was doing a research on the impact of peer tutoring on student success. And of course, different people have different definition of success. And there was one person who had a very kind of a detailed definition of success that I liked. So for him, student success wasn't just grade. It was grades. It was a lot of other things. It's just, like some skills, or how they feel about, about the university and so on and so forth. There was like a whole, amazing framework for, defining student success. So that was the theory that I used when I did my study. Right. So when I was evaluating student success. So that is, I believe, might be used an example of a theoretical lens.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And another one is there a hole in scholarship that you can help fill? Oh, so what other authors have studied, but there is something missing and you can fill this, right?
Exactly, right.
Mhm.
So for example, let's go back to the example of pollution in Bishkek. Maybe there have been a ton of studies about pollution in other post-Soviet capitals, but there hasn't been a study on Bishkek. So in that case, the hole in the scholarship you're filling is you're giving a new case study of this city that hasn't been studied. I mean, I don't think it's true. There have been plenty of studies of pollution in Bishkek, but just to give an example, right? Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Any other questions at this point? All right. If not, let's move on to the key phrases. All right. So things that we might say here would be other scholars have argued something, and then you would give a summary. Previous research has found something. Several or many studies have examined a certain topic or aspect of the topic. However, these studies have failed to, right? So this is, a sentence you could use to start to explain what is missing. One area that has not been studied is similarly. And relatively little is known about, this area. And, topic is understudied or poorly understood. Oh, last one. Building upon this earlier scholarship, I wish to. So with this sentence, you've already explained, what the other scholars have contributed. And now here you're introducing what you are adding to that conversation. All right, so moving on. So the conclusion, of course, what are the real world implications of your findings? This goes back to, what is the importance, right? So what? What is the value of your research? Kind of similar thing. And some key phrases that you can use here would be, this study has implications for, something. The finding of this study can be applied to, a certain case or scenario. This research will help us understand something. All right, so we have created a research proposal checklist for you guys, just to make this easier. We welcome you guys to screenshot this or, however you want, if that would be helpful to you. So for the introduction, check. What question will I be answering in my research, and why is it important? If you have, got both of these in there, then your introduction is looking good. For the methodology, if you have clearly explained what your research design is and why that is the best way to answer your research question, then your methodology section should be looking pretty good. Your literature review, if you've given an overall view of what others have said about your research question and what niche, what hole can your research fill, how is it new, then this section is good. And then conclusion, what is the value of this research? And finally, preliminary source list. So here is the checklist for you guys. And again, if you satisfy all of these, then, I would say you have a pretty good draft. All right. So what happens if you're stuck? You're writing this and then you just don't know what to do. So the first thing, this is advice that I found really helpful when I was a student. Know that you don't have to write from the beginning to the end. So sometimes, you're writing and you just don't know what the next sentence should be, right? Maybe you can work on a different section. Maybe you're not sure about your literature review section. Well, why don't you work on the methodology section instead? I have friends who are PhD students, and a lot of them say that they actually write the introduction last because it's much easier to write a good introduction once they have everything else really clear and their ideas are really settled in their head. So if you don't know where to start, don't freak out, because you can start from the middle and that might actually be way easier in the end. All right, is there a different kind of task that you can work on instead? So maybe you have complete writer's block, but you can still make some contribution to your work by doing other things like finding sources or organizing the sources that you have so it's really clear, formatting your bibliography, finding images, these kinds of things. So you can still be productive, but you're not writing, and so you can sort of recharge your brain for writing later. Can you talk with your advisor? And then can your peers help? Maybe you want to show your draft to someone and just get an opinion. Does this make sense? Is the importance of my topic clear, right? So giving it to someone else and asking for their feedback on what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, what's missing can be really helpful. All right. And lastly, some further resources to share. So for the thesis writers especially, it might be useful to you to read old student theses, and examples of these are available on the library's website, the AUCA library. So you can go to the library's website and scroll down to senior theses, and you can find a huge collection going back many years in different topics. So this might be really useful to you. I would also say that the resources for students page of the Works website, which is work.auca.kg, has a lot of guides and examples. So if you go to work.auca.kg and you scroll down a little bit, there's a big blue circle and it says resources for students. That has a lot of really useful writing tips, including things like how to make sure that your writing is formal enough for an academic essay, different types of essays and how to write those, examples of successful research proposals for you to look at. Some of them are also annotated, meaning that a professor has made notes about them and said, this is what's good about that. This is what this student who wrote this proposal is doing that is, really, really good. So I encourage you to take a look at those. The Work AUCA YouTube channel, I know I've mentioned it a couple of times, but it has useful workshops related to academic writing and research, including a recording of this one in a couple of hours when I upload it. And then lastly, you're welcome, very, very welcome to come to the work at any stage. So our writing tutors, they might not be an expert in your particular field, but what they can help you with are things like how to make sure that your essay is, or your proposal, is clear, how to make sure the structure makes sense. They can help you with research skills, right? How to find sources for your source list, things like that. And if you want to talk to one of our writing tutors, you can go to work.auca.kg to book a session. All right, so that brings me to the end of my slides. So at this point, I will stop screen sharing. I just want to thank you guys all for your attention, and I will open it up for questions. So if you guys could please press the hand raise button to keep the discussion a little bit orderly, that would be really helpful. All right, so we have a question from Askatai.
Sorry, it's just a brief question for Maria. Maria, last time I left early, and could you please again send your email, please? Yeah, because I booked a session with for work writing workshop, but I just didn't mention my WhatsApp number there.
I'll put it in the chat for everyone to see. It's completely public, okay, and anyone can write me if they want to.
I can also put mine as well. Anyone is welcome to write to us with questions. And then our general email is work@auca.kg. All right, so we have a couple of questions. I said that.
Yes, thank you. I have a brief question about research design and methodology part. Can you please one more time clarify how I can understand this research design? If it's possible, could you please share one example?
Sure. So let's say I am studying how Bishkek's air pollution affects people's mental health, right? So there are different ways I could study that. Maybe I decide that the way I want to study that is I'm going to give a survey to people. So my research design is I'm sending out a survey. I might want to explain, how do I find people to give that survey to? So how am I recruiting people, right? Because recruitment into a survey or interviews, well, that can introduce bias depending on how I'm doing that. So, am I doing a survey or interviews, etc. How I'm finding the people to fill out my survey, and then how I'm analyzing the results. So maybe I'm, assigning certain values and saying, okay, if a person uses these types of words in their responses, I'm going to interpret that as saying, they have concerns about pollution, right? And I'm going to give that a numerical value and see, how often that comes up. So basically, how I'm finding people to participate, what I'm asking them to do, whether it's to speak to me, to answer some questions, what kind of questions, and then how I'm interpreting their answers, right? What kind of statistical tools I'm using, for example, that kind of thing. Maria, maybe you want to give an example from the research project that you were talking about?
Sure. Well, basically, research design is, when you're asking yourself, what is my research design? What you're really asking yourself is, how am I going to answer this question? That's what you're asking yourself. So I was, what I was studying at the time was the impact of the work on student success, right? And like I said, student success involves, the concept of student success involves not only grades, right? It also involves how, students are feeling about their experience, what skills they are, what skills they're acquiring, that sort of thing, right? So for that, if I wanted to look at their grades, well, that was easy enough, right? I just pulled the grades from the registrar. If I wanted to find out student retention, that is how many, if I wanted to compare like people who come to the work with people who don't, and how many of them actually stay at the university and graduate, I got that information from, from our university data. If I wanted to see how students are feeling about, how students are perceiving their position at the university, right? Then I interviewed the students. If I wanted to see, also, of course, student success is something, let's say, that the faculty can talk about, right? Then I interviewed the faculty. If I wanted to get, and also, of course, the tutors are the people who also, have some evidence of student success, right? So I interviewed tutors as well. So basically, that's what your research, that's what research design is, and that is, what are you going to do specifically? What will help you answer this question in the best way possible? Okay, and sometimes it is qualitatively through numbers. Sometimes, quantitatively through numbers. Sometimes it's qualitatively through interviews and, and other such things. And sometimes it is the mix of both. That is research design. Have I answered that question?
Yes, thank you.
Alrighty. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you very much for a great workshop. I've just opened Google and went to elibrary.auca.kj and found student thesis research. When I clicked on it, then I got this option, like choose one of these ways to log in. I I tried with both and it didn't work. Can you help me with this?
I cannot at the moment. That is very curious. I can, however, look into it and get back to you. I apologize that the tool is not currently available given the information that I gave you. But thank you for bringing this to our attention. Maria, I don't suppose you have any idea about what these mean, do you?
I think the best thing would be for us to consult the library since it is their resource. And then, we can try to make that information, either, the library changes how people sign in, or maybe, we find out that there is some way that we didn't know about before, and we can make that information available to anybody who writes to me or Erica or to the work.
Yeah. One thing I would say is that sometimes certain resources might be available only on campus using the AUCA network, which I recognize is a huge disadvantage to students who are right now abroad in Tajikistan and elsewhere. But that might be the issue. I'm not sure, however, and I will look into it. So again, thank you for bringing that to our attention, Hirad. Asqatay?
Yeah, I have one more question. Will there be a workshop on methods of research? Because I only know one research, longitudinal study, right? And I'm not sure about other types of research.
Well,
methods.
Research methods are, whereas there is such thing as general research methods, those, research methods are also quite particular to each discipline, right? Research methods in economics are very different from research methods in, let's say, education, right? So research methods is something that is your, that your program is, really should be, is something that is within the purview of your program, right? So they teach you what research methods are traditionally employed in your particular field. So we can't do research methods apart from the fact that it's not something that can be done in one workshop. There isn't such thing as general research methods for everybody.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, just to give an example, the field that I studied was art history and conservation, and a lot of what we would do was archival research, looking at historical documents and things like that, right? That's not how a biologist does research, right? They do experiments, or a sociologist or an anthropologist, well, they would do interviews and observations within certain groups, right? So unfortunately, as Maria mentioned, it's really hard to give a general overview of methods like that. But your professors, I'm sure, are very well equipped within your discipline to give you detailed breakdowns, not only of what methods exist, but what each one does, right? They might be useful for answering different types of questions. Any other questions or comments?
I wanted to just add that, there are two things, obviously, there are two things that you might want to consult your advising faculty about, and those are very important. One is your research question, right? I mean, obviously, because as Erica said again and again, right, everything starts at the research question. You have a good research question, you are likely to get a good answer. And the second one, area where you can really benefit from advice from your faculty, from people who work in that area, is research design. So obviously you can't go to them and expect them to do the design for you, otherwise what would be the point? But you can go to them and ask them, is this effective research? Do you think this is effective research design? Do you think this will get me, will get me the answers to this question, or Or are there any ways to get the answer to my research question that I haven't thought about? So that's what, these folks, that's the reason why these folks have PhDs. So because they know answers to those questions.
Any other questions? Well, if not, I just want to thank everybody once more for all of your attention. I really hope this was helpful. And I hope that if you come away with anything, it is that if you need help with writing, you can always, or with really any topic, you can always come to the WARC, the Writing and Academic Resource Center, and we will be happy and eager to help all of you, no matter if you're struggling to write the first word or you have a draft and you just want another set of eyes to look at it. So thank you guys. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you very much.